And now I am thrilled to turn it over to Yasmin Raji, the new executive director of the most important partner of ours, Swing Left. Yasmin was formerly the national political director of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, the director of organizing and training at the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and a co-founder, while she was in graduate school at the Kennedy School, of the Resistance School, which supports political activism in communities across the country. Welcome, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Janet. Can folks hear me? I'm dialing in by phone to make sure that if my internet cuts out, you can still hear me. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Janet. And thank you all. I mean, it is such a privilege to be with you all. I got to meet Janet and a few others of the folks on the line here just a few weeks ago. And I felt like I was meeting celebrities because from my very first day at Swing Left, I'd heard the reputation of Crimson Goes Blue, and want to thank every single one of you collectively for having donated and raised $300,000 this year. I don't know if that means a lot to you all in terms of what that scale is. You are by far the largest giving circle that we have at Blueprint by an order of magnitude. And what that means for candidates, and I'll get into some of the stories I've been hearing from candidates, is just astronomical, as well as, of course, for the organizations, the movement organizations on the ground that we're going to rely on to win. So as Janet mentioned, I am coming to Swing Left fresh out of the Biden administration, where I was working on American Rescue Plan implementation, and I've dedicated a lot of my career to fighting for abortion rights. So we'll have plenty to talk about tonight. But I just am particularly at a personal level excited to be with this group because, as Janet mentioned, a few of my Kennedy School classmates and I founded something called Resistance School as a sort of therapeutic mechanism of dealing with the 2016 election or the aftermath of the 2016 election. But before that, every single weekend in the fall of 2016 and for the summer before that, my classmates and I went first in cars, then in buses to go knock on doors in New Hampshire, not just for Hillary Clinton, but also for Maggie Hassan. And I may have been on buses with some of you all. I may have been sort of like knocking on doors of the opposite side of the street as many of you all. But I wanted to lift that up because sometimes when we're in the weeds of doing the work, we don't see just how big our impact can be. When we saw that Maggie Hassan had won her Senate seat, without which we would not have the Affordable Care Act. We needed every single vote in the Senate, or not the Affordable Care Act, the vote to not get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Without those critical Senate seats, her election was won by just over 1,000 votes. It was 1,017 votes. I'm looking back at my notes to make sure I got it exactly right. 1,017 votes. We did the math of how many doors we knocked and how many people we brought every weekend just from Harvard campus. And we took credit for that victory because the power of the scale of Harvard students who were committed and alumni and professors. We had a lot of professors on our buses who told us not to tell the administration, but they were out with us every weekend. Was the reason why we won that election, and you all have kept that momentum going. So thank you for all of that. And I'm joining you tonight. I heard there is a lot of doom and gloom, and I was grateful to hear Al Franken make a few jokes about the doom and gloom. I'm actually feeling very cautiously optimistic in a way that I did not just a couple months ago when I joined this role. And I'll go through a little bit of why that is, but I wanted to emphasize a couple of the points that I heard from both Janet and from Al Franken earlier, which is this is not an election about the issues. This is not an election really about the parties. This is an election about our democracy. And we can't say that point enough. The two numbers that, to use Janet's language, that keep me up at night are that 1/3 of the Republicans running in the midterms this cycle are election deniers. 1/3. 1 out of every 3 Republicans running this cycle is an election denier. I mean, we're not talking about the fringe of the party. We are talking about 1 out of 3 of the people that we see on tickets. And so with that many election deniers on the ballot, what we're talking about is 60% of Americans in the country, or obviously in the country, of Americans this November will have on their ballot as they're choosing their candidate, an election denier on the list. That is an insane thing, that reality that we are facing. But I mean, that is the reason why I left my job in the administration earlier than I had planned. That is the reason why I'm honored to be at Swing Left in the fight with you all, because this is the fight for our lives, for our democracy. And I also saw, and that is, I mean, democracy overall is worth saving, but also in a moment of real crisis as a country. Janet talked a little bit about the economic crisis and, you know, what folks are facing and gas prices and so on and so forth. We were fighting on COVID relief in the Biden administration at Treasury Department, and the blocks that we had in the way of getting things done, in the way of getting relief into people's hands, was not the legislation. It was not the administration. It was Republican members of state legislatures in places like Pennsylvania, which I know was mentioned already, that were saying, you know what, we're not going to pass a COVID relief package for these American Rescue Plan funds right now. We're going to wait until November, when we'll probably have a Republican governor, and then we'll probably get more out of it. So it's not, it is democracy. It is also, we're in the fight for our lives for the most basic investments in people in crisis, whether that's economic crisis, whether that's healthcare crisis, whether that is an infrastructure crisis. I mean, the stakes are huge, and these are not issues, as Janet said, these are not like radical issues. These are basic issues that any person, I think, with some semblance of sanity should be aligned on. But that is where we are. And so, so all of that is sort of like what's at stake. But there is a lot to be optimistic about. And the reason for that is in large part because we are so freaking pissed off, as we should be. And you all, I'm sure, have seen all the same numbers that I have, but the numbers that we are seeing post the awful Dobbs news of just, I mean, I'm sure I felt like the way that I did after the 2016 election is how I felt the day that we heard that the leak was real. And even though we knew it was coming, Roe was going to be overturned. But what we've seen is that women in particular, but Americans across the political spectrum are pissed off. And this is one step way too far. We saw that in Kansas. I know that was mentioned already. We also saw that in New York 19. And the fact I was lucky enough to attend Congressman now, Pat Ryan's swearing in on Tuesday night, which was incredible and incredibly moving. And he pulled me aside, seeing I didn't know him. I've never met him before until that night, but he saw my Swing Left name badge, and he came up to me and he said, "You're with Swing Left. I just got to thank you for the work that your volunteers did." That probably includes a lot of folks on this line, both in raising money and in knocking on doors. And he said, "I was really nervous. You knew we were polling 8 points behind. The Saturday before Election Day, I saw a couple buses of Swing Left volunteers show up." And he was like, "I just knew I was breathing easier." And then, and this goes back to our Maggie Hassan example, he said, "You saw the election results. We won by 2 points. You know how many votes that is? That is a field victory. So the only reason we won is because people got on buses. They decided to spend their weekend, as Senator Franken said, away from their children, taught their children how to use the microwave in order to go out and knock on doors and get the word out." And that is why we have Pat Ryan elected to Congress, and why we are showing that candidates who are leaning into the issues that people care about. Abortion rights is not a partisan issue. The majority, 77% of Americans agree with us on this issue, as Janet alluded to in her opening. 77% of Americans, that's Republicans, that's independents, that's Democrats, agree with us. Candidates don't need to be shy about the issue. Pat Ryan leaned in, and that is why he won. And we're really, really, really proud of that. So we're seeing that also.
Yasmin. I think this is the passion that we need, and the images of those buses is what we're trying to get everybody tonight to hear. And we just so appreciate our work with Swing Left, and we're so glad you're at the helm now.
We are so grateful, and I hope that we get to see many of you all on the buses. I know that Janet will be sharing out our action links and everything. But the last weekend in particular, that last weekend before the election, is going to be critical to make sure we get the troops rallied. So thank you all for all that you do, and we hope to see you back out on the field.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. I just love the image of Yasmin and her Kennedy School friends going canvassing together. And as everyone's saying, we need to have direct contact with voters. Those Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents who might not vote without a little extra push, or who might not know how to vote with all the vote-suppressing changes that have been made.